where you see this dirt lot right here. This is a house that I lived in, or was a house that I lived in for 3 years when I first moved to Youngstown.
That's Phil Kidd. He's a community organizer for the Mahoning Valley Organizing Collaborative and the founder of Defend Youngstown, a grassroots campaign that preached the gospel of Youngstown and its various community initiatives. We're standing on Illinois Avenue, me, Kidd, and a Youngstown resident, John Slanina.
3 years ago, this house in and of itself, which is, only a block and a half from a 34-acre city park and the university and so on and so forth, once stood and was occupied. But you see, because of what you've got going on down here by Wick Avenue.
Wick Avenue is the eastern border of the Wick Park neighborhood. It used to be home to 6 dealerships and is now home to none.
This was a house. There were 3 lots here. For those who can't, see this, there were 3 lots and 3 houses that were once here 3 to 5 years ago. They're gone, and that vacancy, as we look up the street, is creeping up to the park. So there has to be some kind of effective stabilization strategy with some of this vacant land from that hard edge on Wick Avenue up to where we start getting up to the residential structures right in here.
There are no small houses in Wick Park. Once upon a time, Wick Park was the outskirts of Youngstown, and it's where all the industrial elite laid their heads. As the steel industry declined, these 15-room mansions were subdivided, and the neighborhood changed.
Log cabin. A log cabin in the middle of a neighborhood. It's quite remarkable housing stock that still remains. And this is why now a city like Youngstown that's committed to this new planning principle and, not saying that, what we need to do with these vacant lots? If we want to turn this neighborhood around, what we need to do is build new market rate housing right next to that house. No, that's not necessarily the strategy. The strategy would be, how do you repurpose the vacant lot in a way that complements the existing housing stock that's there, whether that is, again, a community garden or simply just landscaping or things of this nature.
Wick Avenue is littered with what used to be dealerships. With those dealerships came parking lots. Now that the dealerships are gone, the parking lots are empty. The lots, Kidd says, don't exactly instill confidence in the neighborhood, and they lower its value. But the neighborhood association, which Kidd is a member of, has plans.
When we're talking about Youngstown 2010 and right-sizing and returning a lot of vacant property back to its natural use to become an asset for the neighborhood itself, when you take a look at, you can see here on Wick Avenue, starting at Illinois, all these abandoned parking lots that line all the way down to one of our bigger institutions here, the Golden Dawn Restaurant, which has been around since 1934, owned by the same family. One guy's 87, one guy's 86. It's a staple. It's an institution in Youngstown. One of the visions here of what you would do with that vacant and abandoned land in a neighborhood like Wick Park is this here, if we were able to find a repurposing strategy to basically rip up this concrete here and turn these into a series of either urban farms, pocket parks, things of this nature, what you're doing is you're creating actual value for a lot of the housing we're trying to remarket right now. So it's a different period for this neighborhood, and we're trying to think through how do you take a new plan like 2010, a new vision, and inject that into a neighborhood like this that once had a lot of density, large housing stock, and like John said, still has this mix of people that still own these entire huge houses that are wealthy, maybe subdivided units, maybe students, and try to make all that work, but using the vacant land as an asset.
But vacant land as an asset doesn't mean to demo everything. Kidd says it needs to be a case-by-case examination, especially in a neighborhood like Wick Park, a transitional neighborhood that, as Kidd says, is on the 45-yard line and has the potential to move the ball up past the 50.
It's not just clear the slate everywhere, every vacant structure, get them down. That's not the game plan. It's got to be strategic in that sense.
Kidd says none of this is possible without the community, and in Youngstown, they have a different approach to planning. He says it's unique. It works the top-down and the bottom-up approach at the same time.
Well, I think that's where Youngstown's unique. That's where they've, I think, may be ahead of the curve on some of these other cities, because sometimes it's one or the other. In a lot of these communities, actually, that's the scenario. Here, the top kind of said, let's do this, but let's start with the bottom up, and the top will help facilitate the bottom up approach. Out of necessity, out of, just the fact that was the talent that was just around at that time. Whatever the reason was, that's what happened. And I think because of that, because the community buy-in from the bottom up, just like when you organize a neighborhood, you don't have someone come in there and say, this is what the neighborhood's going to do. You go to the neighborhood residents, you knock on the doors, you ask them what they think the problems are, you think that what would you like to see happen, you ask them what they're willing to do about it, you get their input, and then because they're going to be the ones that create the agenda, and they're the ones that are going to sustain whatever's created in that neighborhood. It's the same thing with the city at large. It was a large community organizing process to come up with the 2010 plan. So yes, it's a top-based agenda carrying out the will of the ground-up's input.
Through this approach, there has been a significant change in Wick Park over the last 2 years. John Slanina explains.
It's kind of neat, the stuff that are actually happening. Local currency to a smaller extent. I mean, not everywhere, but you could use it at the farmer's market. There's this kitchen incubator, which is purchased, in midst of renovating, and the apartments are open for rent. That's happened within the last 6 months. The farmer's market, definitely established. The Greater Green Festival, Will Allen came down, who talked a lot about urban agriculture. He came down last year for it as tons of people. And so 2 years ago, none of that was here. So what's exciting to me is, in 2 years, what's going to be here? Now, it could plateau. It could get worse. It might get better. But just thinking that, and that whole Greater Green Festival came from one impassioned lawyer who lives up in this neighborhood, and she just wanted to do something. I mean, she was one person, and she just did it. And then she got other people to buy in. It's just... the whole thing about one person making a difference, I mean, it's case in point right there.
Here's Kid explaining a little more about the festival.
The Neighborhood Association has organized an event called the Greater Green Festival that we have every year in Wick Park, which is basically a celebration and a recognition and education of all the different greening principles for a city of our size, like the whole like the industrial gray to the new kind of planning of green, kind of thing. So I don't know of any other cities that are really like having major festivals that turning out thousands of people for a festival celebrating planning principles.
But as great as all of this sounds, and as much progress as Youngstown and the Wick Park neighborhood has seen, no matter who is leading the discussion, the grassroots organizer or the mayor, resources are key.
A lot of what we're describing is the fundamental aspects, the lifeblood of how you're going to turn parts, neighborhoods, all these things around in a city like Youngstown. But, and I don't want to diverge too far, none of this can actually be realized to the degree it needs to be if we do not have the type of resources that we need to do a lot of this work. That's the reality of the situation. So what it takes beyond just figuring out your own neighborhood strategy and the city of Youngstown trying to figure out its new vision, but it's the city of Youngstown, those neighborhood residents connecting then beyond Youngstown with the Flints, with the Buffaloes, even with the Clevelands and Pittsburghs in our case, because we've been able to organize the three cities together to say, these are the common systemic problems that are affecting all of our communities. How do we acquire vacant land quicker? How do we find better program and policies at the federal level to help assist us with these developments as we create our plans? All these things have to be working in concert. So there's a top above the top. There's a top above the local top, and that also has to include your leadership and your bottom grassroots everyday neighborhood leader.
As we walk through Kid's neighborhood, past empty parking lots, vacant parcels of land, past houses as big as the Whitney, I realize this could be Detroit. Yes, they have blight and vacant land and a shrinking population, and all those things tie us together. But what makes Youngstown really feel like home is the passion of people like Kid.